In 1969, deep inside Pontiac's engineering department, a small group of racers and engineers built an engine they believed could destroy NASCAR's biggest monsters, not compete with them. Destroy them. It screamed past 8,000 revolutions per minute. It inhaled air through massive tunnel port intake runners so large mechanics joked you could lose a flashlight inside them. And on the dyno, this little high-revving V8 was making power numbers that scared even General Motors executives. But what almost nobody knows is this engine never got the chance. Not because it was slow, not because it failed, but because the entire world around it changed before it could strike. This is the story of the Pontiac 303 tunnel port, the engine that should have dominated NASCAR, but never did. And trust me, you probably think you know how this story ends. You don't. By the late 1960s, NASCAR had become an all-out horsepower war. Ford had the Boss 429. Chrysler unleashed the terrifying 426 Hemi. Chevrolet teams were pushing increasingly aggressive big blocks. Speeds at Daytona were climbing past 190 miles per hour. Engines weren't just making power anymore. They were becoming weapons. Every Sunday, these monsters battled on superspeedways across America: Talladega, Daytona, Charlotte. The roar of unrestricted V8s shook grandstands. Drivers fought cars that wanted to kill them. And manufacturers poured millions into programs designed for one purpose: winning at any cost. The stakes had never been higher. Race on Sunday, sell on Monday wasn't just a slogan. It was survival. Whichever brand crossed the finish line first could plaster victory ads across every newspaper in America by Tuesday morning. Dealerships cashed in. Performance cars flew off showroom floors. Racing success translated directly into profits. And everyone knew it. Pontiac understood the danger better than most. Just a few years earlier, Pontiac had become one of the hottest names in American performance. The GTO practically ignited the muscle car era. Pontiac engineers like Malcolm McKellar and Herb Adams were obsessed with racing. They didn't just want fast street cars. They wanted dominance. And for a while, they had it. Pontiac V8s were respected everywhere: drag strips, stock car racing, road courses. The Ram Air programs earned legendary status among street racers. Pontiac's advertising screamed performance. John DeLorean himself championed the brand's racing image, pushing boundaries corporate GM preferred to pretend didn't exist. But by 1968, the company faced a massive problem. The rules were changing. NASCAR had started shifting towards smaller displacement engines for certain competition categories. The SCCA's Trans-Am series introduced a hard 5-liter limit. That meant 305 cubic inches maximum. Suddenly, giant 400 and 428 cubic inch torque monsters became dead weight. Ford saw it coming early. The Boss 302 program launched specifically to dominate Trans-Am competition. Chevrolet began developing the small block Z28. Even Chrysler started exploring smaller displacement racing options. Pontiac risked being left behind. So Pontiac engineers decided to build something completely different. Not a brute force big block, a precision weapon. The result was the Pontiac 303 tunnel port V8. And it was unlike anything Pontiac had ever built before. Most people don't realize how radical this engine really was. On paper, it sounded almost small, just 303 cubic inches, about 5 liters. Tiny compared to the monstrous 426 Hemis and 427 Fords dominating headlines. But displacement alone means nothing if an engine can breathe, and this thing could breathe like a hurricane. The block itself used Pontiac's familiar architecture, but heavily modified. Bore measured approximately 4.125 inches, while stroke came in at an ultra-short 2.84 inches. That short stroke was critical. It reduced piston speed dramatically at high RPM, allowing the engine to rev far beyond what traditional Pontiac V8s could safely handle. Most Pontiac street engines struggled above 5,500 revolutions per minute. The 303 wanted 8,000. Some race builds reportedly pushed beyond that. Engineers reinforced the block with additional webbing in critical stress areas. Main bearing caps received special attention. The crankshaft itself became a work of art. Forged from high-grade steel, cross-drilled, balanced to tolerances that seemed obsessive even by racing standards. Every rotating component was measured, weighed, matched. This wasn't mass production. This was precision engineering. And then there were the heads. The legendary tunnel port cylinder heads became the heart of the entire project. Ford had experimented with tunnel port designs before, but Pontiac engineers took the idea even further. The intake ports were enormous. Straight-shot runners designed to feed huge volumes of air directly into the combustion chamber at insane engine speeds. The pushrods literally passed through tubes inside the intake ports themselves. That's why they called it a tunnel port. It looked crazy because it was. At lower RPM, airflow velocity suffered. Street drivability? Terrible. Low-end torque? Weak. The engine felt lazy below 4,000 revolutions per minute, almost agricultural. But once the tatch climbed, the engine transformed into something violent. One Pontiac engineer reportedly described it as a small block acting like a Formula One engine. The valve sizes were absolutely massive for the displacement. Intake valves measured over 2.19 inches. Exhaust valves weren't far behind. Springs needed incredible seat pressure to prevent float at high RPM, which created its own problems with valve train wear. The camshaft profiles were equally aggressive. Duration numbers climbed well beyond anything Pontiac had offered in street applications. Overlap became so extreme that idle quality sounded like the engine was trying to eat itself. But on a racetrack, pure violence. And then the real nightmare started. The higher they revved the engine, the more weaknesses appeared. At 7,500 revolutions per minute, oil control became a disaster. Bearings overheated. Windage inside the crankcase whipped oil into foam. Valve springs started floating. Pushrods bent under sustained high-speed loads. On early dyno pulls, mechanics reportedly found metallic glitter coating the oil pans after only a few test sessions. One engineer later recalled, the bearings looked like charcoal briquettes. The tunnel port design, while brilliant for airflow, created cooling challenges nobody anticipated. Heat buildup around the exhaust ports became severe during sustained high RPM operation. Valve seats would loosen. Head gaskets failed. Some test engines literally cracked cylinder heads after particularly brutal dyno sessions. So Pontiac attacked the problems one by one. They developed stronger forged connecting rods, lightweight forged pistons, aggressive solid lifter camshafts. The oiling system received extensive modifications with priority feed improvements aimed at protecting the crankshaft under sustained high RPM loads. Engineers experimented with different windage tray designs. Dry sump oiling systems appeared on some race versions. Crank scrapers, improved oil pump designs. Every component received obsessive attention. The compression ratio climbed into the 12-to-1 range in some race versions. Certain experimental builds allegedly pushed even higher. Fuel consumption became outrageous. But horsepower, that's where things got interesting. Very interesting. Official numbers were always vague because GM feared regulatory scrutiny and internal corporate politics. But most historians estimate the full race 303 tunnel port produced somewhere between 475 and 525 horsepower naturally aspirated, from only 303 cubic inches. In 1969, think about that for a second. That's nearly 1.7 horsepower per cubic inch in an era when many NASCAR engines barely crossed 1.2. And unlike giant big blocks, this engine made power through RPM, massive RPM. The power curve looked completely different from traditional American V8s. Instead of peaking around 5,500 revolutions per minute and falling off, the 303 just kept pulling. 6,000, 7,000. Some dyno charts allegedly showed peak power arriving well past 7,500 revolutions per minute. That was unheard of. Drivers described the sound as completely different from traditional American V8s. Instead of a deep muscle car roar, the 303 screamed, sharp, mechanical, angry, like it wanted to tear itself apart. And honestly, sometimes it did. Pontiac installed development versions into Trans-Am Firebirds and test mules. On road courses, the engine showed terrifying potential. The lightweight rotating assembly let it explode out of corners. Rivals struggled to match its top-end pull once the RPM climbed. At tracks like Riverside and Daytona testing sessions, whispers started spreading through the paddock. Pontiac had built something dangerous. Test drivers came back with wild stories. The engine's response felt electric compared to traditional V8s. Throttle input translated instantly into acceleration. The reduced reciprocating mass meant the engine could change speeds almost instantaneously. But there was one massive problem: General Motors itself. You see, during the late 1950s and early 1960s, GM officially withdrew from factory-backed racing after political pressure and safety concerns. Publicly, GM claimed racing promoted dangerous driving. Internally, executives feared antitrust scrutiny and corporate backlash. The AMA racing ban of 1,957 supposedly ended factory participation across the entire American automotive industry. Manufacturers signed agreements pledging to stop racing involvement. But the truth was more complicated. Brands like Chevrolet, Pontiac, and Oldsmobile secretly continued supporting racing through back channels, engineering assistance, parts programs, quiet funding. Everybody knew it was happening. Performance parts mysteriously appeared at race shops. Engineers took vacations that coincidentally aligned with major racing events. Development mules received testing at tracks that just happened to host NASCAR races. Nobody was fooled. But the charade continued because it protected GM's corporate leadership from direct responsibility, plausible deniability. If questioned, executives could claim individual divisions acted independently. But by 1969, GM management became nervous again. Insurance companies were panicking over muscle cars. Government regulators were circling. Emissions laws loomed on the horizon. Safety advocates attacked rising horsepower figures. Ralph Nader's influence had put the entire automotive industry under microscope scrutiny, and NASCAR itself was entering a period of growing controversy over aerodynamic cars and runaway speeds. Pontiac's insane high-revving 303 suddenly looked politically dangerous, especially because it wasn't just a racing engine, it was a glimpse into the future. Most people have no idea how advanced this project really was. The 303 wasn't built around brute displacement like old-school American V8s. It relied on airflow efficiency, high engine speed, lightweight internals, and precise breathing characteristics. The entire philosophy contradicted traditional American engineering wisdom. Bigger was always better. Cubic inches meant everything. Low RPM torque won races. The 303 challenged all of that. In many ways, it predicted the philosophy of modern performance engines decades early. European manufacturers had already embraced high-revving, smaller displacement engines. Formula One technology focused on airflow and engine speed. But American racing remained firmly committed to displacement and torque, and that scared traditionalists. Then came the crushing blow. In 1970, General Motors issued a direct corporate ban limiting engine displacement in mid-size performance cars and restricting official racing involvement even further. Funding dried up, racing programs were quietly strangled. Engineering teams got reassigned. The 303 tunnel port suddenly became an orphan. Pontiac still pushed forward in Trans-Am competition with the Firebird program, but without full corporate commitment, development slowed dramatically. Reliability remained inconsistent. Parts availability became difficult. And meanwhile, Ford and Chrysler continued throwing massive resources into NASCAR and high-level racing programs. The Pontiac team knew time was running out. Private race teams expressed interest, but building competitive 303 engines required expertise and components that weren't widely available. The tunnel port heads alone demanded specialized knowledge. Tuning the aggressive cam profiles and managing the violent power delivery required experience most mechanics simply didn't have. So they made one final push. At testing sessions and select races, the 303 showed flashes of brilliance. Drivers loved its top-end charge. The engine's lightweight rotating assembly allowed faster throttle response than many larger rivals. On long straights, it kept pulling long after conventional Pontiac V8s ran out of breath. When everything worked perfectly, the 303 was transcendent. But sustained racing exposed weaknesses. Valve train durability remained fragile. Tunnel port airflow worked brilliantly at peak RPM but hurt drivability and flexibility. The engine demanded constant maintenance. Mechanics adjusted lash settings obsessively. Valve springs wore rapidly under extreme RPM loads. And then there was cost. Building a competitive 303 wasn't cheap. Exotic valve train components, race-prepped heads, forged internals, it all added up fast. Some race teams reportedly spent nearly double what conventional small block programs required. And, without full GM support, private teams hesitated. Why invest enormous resources into an orphan engine with questionable parts availability when proven alternatives existed? Ford's Boss 302 had factory backing. Chevrolet's Z28 program was well established. The 303 offered potential, but potential doesn't win championships. You can probably guess what happened next, but the truth is even crazier. Before the Pontiac 303 tunnel port ever reached its true potential, the entire muscle car era began collapsing around it. The Clean Air Act changed everything. Emissions regulations tightened. Compression ratios dropped industry-wide. Insurance premiums exploded for high-performance cars. Fuel concerns started creeping into public consciousness. The 1973 oil crisis devastated performance car sales. By 1971, the golden age of unrestricted American horsepower was already dying. Pontiac engineers watched the future disappear in real time. High-compression race engines became liabilities overnight. The technology that made the 303 special aggressive compression, massive airflow, zero emissions equipment suddenly became impossible to federalize for street use. The 303 program faded quietly into obscurity. No massive championship victory. No Daytona domination. No legendary NASCAR dynasty. Just fragments, prototypes, test engines, stories whispered between mechanics and racers who remembered hearing that insane screaming V8 at full throttle. And that might be the saddest part of all, because beneath the politics, the timing, and the corporate fear, the Pontiac 303 tunnel port may have been one of the smartest American racing engines of its era. Today, surviving examples are incredibly rare. Real tunnel port heads alone can sell for staggering amounts among collectors. Vintage racers and Pontiac enthusiasts still debate the engine's true potential. Some believe it could have rivaled Ford's Boss 302 inches Trans-Am competition. Others think further development might have created a genuine NASCAR threat during the early 1970s. Complete running 303 engines almost never appear on the market. When they do, prices reach levels that seem insane for an engine most people have never heard of. We'll never know, but what we do know is this. The engineering philosophy behind the 303 survived. High-revving small displacement performance engines eventually became the global standard. Lightweight internals, massive airflow, short-stroke design, high RPM horsepower. Modern performance cars from Japanese sports cars to European supercars now follow many of the same principles Pontiac engineers experimented with back in 1969. Honda's VTEC technology, BMW's M-Division engines, Ferrari's approach to naturally aspirated performance, all of them embraced concepts the 303 explored decades earlier. They were just too early, and being early in the automotive world can be just as deadly as being wrong. Today, when people talk about forgotten racing engines, names like the 426 Hemi, Boss 429, and Ford Camry usually dominate the conversation. The Pontiac 303 tunnel port rarely gets mentioned outside hardcore enthusiast circles. Most casual car fans have never heard of it. Even dedicated muscle car enthusiasts often overlook it in favor of more famous Pontiac engines like the Ram Air 5 or the legendary Super Duty programs. But maybe that's exactly why this engine matters. Because it represents something bigger than horsepower numbers or race wins. It represents the road not taken. An alternate future where Pontiac fully embraced high-revving racing technology. A future where NASCAR's biggest threat wasn't another giant big block, but a screaming little 303 cubic inch V8 that sounded like pure mechanical rage. A future where American racing evolved differently, where displacement gave way to efficiency, where engineering sophistication mattered more than cubic inches. The engine never got its moment, but maybe that's why people still obsess over it today. Because unfinished legends never really die, they just get louder with time. And honestly, the Pontiac 303 tunnel port may be one of the loudest what-if stories in racing history. If you enjoyed this deep dive, let me know in the comments what forgotten engine or racing rivalry you want to see next. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next piece of automotive history most people have never heard told like this.